I can't I can't see the chat, so that's one of the ways in which I thankfully have help.
Yeah.
Julie's going to be looking at the chat and informing me when there are questions. Okay, well, welcome everybody. It's great to see you. What a wonderful conference this has been so far. And today I wanted to talk a little bit about my own personal obsession, which is what we're going to do when AI can do everything we can do. And in fact, we're awfully close from an academic perspective right now. To introduce myself, I'm a professor in the College of Engineering and Applied Science at the University of Colorado in Boulder. I direct the Generative Futures Lab for AI, which is a play space for faculty, staff, and students to basically play with paid models, learn how they work, and learn how they don't work so that they have some intuition about what they can do with models. And the other thing I was probably worth mentioning is that my current course in the College of Engineering is a very large course entitled How Not to Be Replaced by AI. So this talk is very much in keeping with what we've been talking about this semester. So welcome, and I will get started. So very, very quickly first, I wanted to put forth the state of the question. So many people are talking about human autonomy, AI reliance, and I just wanted to give you a kind of landscape of all of the different schools of thought on this right now and the ways in which people are referring to the problem. So the centaur cyborg problem, there are multiple studies. It was first proposed by chess master Garry Kasparov after he was beaten by Deep Blue, and then later was picked up by Ethan Mollick in his blog post and then his book. The augmentation versus replacement debate, which is central to the future of work studies. So we're seeing this coming largely out of business schools. The cognitive offloading school of thought. There are multiple educational studies that you've probably come across already that talk about the dangers of cognitive offloading and what we're losing. I will mention a pop culture reference because of having been to the uh, coffee opening breakfasty cafe thing this morning. Um, in popular culture, a lot of people are talking about idiocracy and how it's finally hitting us, and that we are dumbing ourselves down. I think my very favorite way that this has been described, and this is quite recently, just last month, by a in the EDUCAUSE Review in a great article. It's called creeping cognitive displacement syndrome. And I like that very much because of the creeping part. And so to present my space, my place within this larger conversation, I'm deeply concerned about the erosion of autonomy through incremental cognitive, decisional, and communicative surrender. I think there's been a gradual, insidious abdication of intellectual responsibility. It seeps into other aspects of our lives as well. It's not just academic, and it's not just students. It is all of us who are experiencing this phenomenon. The seeping into our lives. I had a student give a fantastic example of this. You know, it started with "Tell me what to make for dinner," which is very convenient, and then became "Tell me what to eat," which is actually a little bit more existential. And then finally, "Tell me if I should break up with my dating unit, or if I should accept a job, or if I should drop out of school, or if I should take unresearched wellness supplements." So just to give you a sense of the fact that we all know we're struggling, and it's very hard to put a line in the sand because everything's moving so quickly because the beach is shifting constantly. So in the end, what I want to talk about today is the offloading of the construction and the discernment of meaning, that is really fundamental to human capabilities and human happiness. So with that said, we're going to pause for a philosophical moment. Yay, Aristotle. I simply wanted to bring up the Nicomachean Ethics. If you haven't read it recently, it's an excellent read, and you might want to go back and take a look. The reason I bring Aristotle into this is that what we're facing is not a new problem. It's an ancient problem. It's just that it's much easier to fall into the traps that Aristotle described now because of artificial intelligence. So the Nicomachean Ethics presented one of the first cognitive frameworks. um, uh, 350 BC. And Aristotle talked about virtues, some of which we now refer to as capabilities or even durable skills, and said that these capabilities are not innate, they're acquired. So, first of all, we're not born with them. Second, we have to work hard to get them. And third, they're strengthened through habituation. So, repeatedly exercising human capabilities is how we acquire and sustain and grow those capabilities. He also said that the practicing these skills and improving upon them is a fundamental key to living well, and that it's not just knowing how to act well, it's acting well, that is, choosing to act. So simply having an abstract idea, this is why I'm not a fan of abstract ethics, I'm a fan of applied ethics. So, finally, my take on this is that the ability to think critically, to make decisions, to act wisely, and communicate effectively, all of them wither away from lack of practice. And I believe we're seeing that in our students. And I know I've seen it in myself. So I also want to mention in many cases, cognitive offloading is not intentional. So this is not a conversation about cheating. This is a conversation about how easy it is to relax into accepting something that wasn't yours. Students who know it's ethically wrong and dangerous to use AI find that they can't stop, and the fight, the first stage is always acknowledging that you have a problem, but actually the second part is much harder, and that is to try to figure out how you stop doing it. There's a very strong psychological and emotional reinforcement that we get from the efficiency of it and the dopamine hit of a quick completion. And I'd say probably, in practice, one of the highest social values of our society is getting things done. So that's the kind of reinforcement mechanism I'm talking about. And this is not about blame, it's about an existential risk. So, my course, which is officially entitled How Not to Be Replaced by AI, is unofficially entitled How Not to Replace Yourself with AI. And the work that I've been doing and that I'll present today has to do with ways in which we can gauge how much we're replacing ourselves, how much agency we're surrendering, and then to provide different methods for reasserting one's control, agency, decision making, cognitive ability. So I'm calling, this is my working document. I'm calling my framework the CDA framework. So cognitive, communicative, and decisional agency in human AI collaborative work is what I'm looking at. So what I built is a self-assessment instrument, a classroom activity guide, and some course design principles for university educators as well. So happy to talk about any of these offline, but I just wanted to give you a quick sense of where this comes from and what it looks like. There are two frameworks that I strongly recommend you take a look at if you haven't already. One comes from the MIT Sloan School of Management. So this is one of the future work studies. It is called the EPIC Framework for Human AI Augmentation. And it suggests that there are a number of durable skills and human capabilities that are still valuable in the job market that are not replaceable by AI and that students should be working hard to acquire. And, therefore, by implication, that we should be helping students to acquire through our educational design. The human capabilities that they're talking about all pretty much align with what Aristotle was talking about those millennia ago. Empathy and emotional intelligence, presence, networking and connectedness, opinion, judgment, and ethics, which is a large part of what we'll talk about today, creativity and imagination, and finally, hope, vision, and leadership. Personally, I would add to this playfulness and curiosity, but I'll stop there and not say any more. So anyway, this below you'll see the reference to this text, and I will post it to the Discord as well.
Great, and we do have a quick question in the chat for
sure.
you. It's Leanne would love to know more about dopamine release cycles related to LLM and human interactions, and that was A couple folks asked about that. And then also the slide deck will be shared and it
Yes, it
is. It'll
will.
be, yes. Okay.
Promise.
So back to the dopamine question then, please.
Yeah, so the dopamine question is a big one, and the fact that several companies have started to design their tools so that they will draw you in and addict you is really problematic. You may have noticed, for example, that OpenAI's tools, particularly ChatGPT, when you're in a chat, will never stop. It will ask you another question, and that's a way to keep you hooked and engaged and
Mhm.
interacting with the model. The fact that the voice models for both ChatGPT and Gemini have developed into these incredibly uncanny, imitative, I'm your buddy kind of voice. The fact that overall, LLMs are quite programmed to be quite sycophantic. This is one of the reasons I like Anthropic most because it is not that way. But it will tend to compliment you and it will tend to pull all of your emotional strings in order to either guilt you into continuing conversation or praise you and therefore you want to continue a conversation. All of these things have the same kind of direct effect on us as getting likes on Instagram or getting voted up on Reddit or you name it. And so now there have been a couple of really interesting studies. I can also post references to those about this dopamine effect of interaction with LLMs. And yes, the second question, I'll post these slides as soon as we're done.
Super.
So shall I go ahead?
There are no more questions, so please
Okay,
continue.
perfect. Okay, so here's the other framework that I really recommend you take a look at. This one I came across because I also, in my many lives in engineering, have been teaching writing with AI, a course called AI Critical Thinking and Inquiry. And this artificial intelligence disclosure framework, which came out in 2024, turned out to be invaluable to me to help students start looking at all of the many different ways they might be using AI to construct an argument to write a paper, and then showing them simple, well, it's complicated, but still quite straightforward ways that you can cite all of those different ways that you're using AI. So I'm going to leap forward for 1 second here and show you this massive screen that just gives you a sense of some of the range of ways in which students are currently using AI for constructing an argument, writing a paper. The starting with initial stages where you're coming up with the general ideas, conceptualization, coming up with methodology, which AI is quite good at proposing, the processes that you go through for collecting and analyzing information. So a data collection method, the execution, which is, could be an AI powered web search, the curation, how you're managing your knowledge base, like for example, Notebook LM, data analysis, what kinds of analysis are you performing and how much of that is tied up with AI. Ethical considerations like the privacy and security of any data that you use for your work. And even, the project management might be by AI or output and manuscript preparation might be largely helped or assisted by AI. So ways of interpreting, ways of visualizing, particularly the danger of creating graphs and visual representations of data right now. And then, then we get to the part where actually most of us are focused, which is reviewing and editing the writing itself. Also, translation. A lot of students are using AI to translate, and that's an interesting challenge as well. So that just gives you, that's not all of it, but that gives you a sense of the landscape. This is what a citation might look like, a statement example. The tool I used it for conceptualization. I used it for data collection. I used it for data analysis. Here's my statement on privacy and security in using these tools. Here's how I used it for writing and editing. There was some project administration that happened. In other words, there are, I think, quite useful tools for setting out for oops, what happened there? Okay, for setting out the ways in which you have engaged with AI to produce a single project. So again, that's not my framework, but it's very much informs the framework that I built. So back to this framework that I'm going to talk about today. I'm trying to, I hope you can't see the reminders there. Okay, so the CDA framework tries to organize human agency in AI work into three different dimensions. And these are the ones that I see as most problematic in higher ed. Cognitive agency, the question is who is doing the thinking? Communicative agency, whose voice and judgment are shaping the output? And decisional agency, who's making the genuine choices about what is said rather than simply ratifying AI generated recommendations. So the big question, which is why I guess I bolded it, it is trying to ask whether the human is the originating intelligence or simply an editor reviewing someone else's work, or in this case, some other entity's work. So just to give you a sense of what I mean by these terms, uh, cognitive agency definition, it's the degree to which the human is the originating, organizing, and critically evaluating intelligence in a task. So the question isn't, did AI assist in the thinking, but did the human do any thinking? How much of that original thinking was human? And I would suggest that a practitioner with full cognitive agency could, if asked to explain the work, reconstruct the argument, the analysis, or the solution from their own understanding without having to look at whatever the output was. So I've also visualized this on a scale of augmentation to amplification to delegation, to show how this might look, because of course this is incredibly nuanced and it's a very slippery slope from augmentation toward delegation. When I say communicative agency, what I mean is the presence of a human's own voice, rhetorical choices, and relational judgment in the output. So the practical test for this is whether a reader familiar with the practitioner's work would recognize her. Like, is this actually somebody I know, or does this sound like somebody I don't know? A related test is whether the writer in this case made deliberate rhetorical choices about what to include and omit, and I guess you can probably just read the rest. How to open, what to leave unresolved. These choices constitute communicative agency, all of them. Accepting AI's choices about any of these does not constitute communicative agency. So the scale I've given here is a voice present, a voice assisted, and a voice replaced. This is particularly tricky when we are starting to teach students how to write. When are they going to develop their own voice at all? And how would we know what their voice sounds like? So in practice, in my writing classes, students spend the first week of class writing in class, no AI. They're writing one good sentence. The second week, they're writing one good paragraph. And the third week, they're writing one good argument. Then we can introduce AI. But the idea is that until they can recognize what good is, they really have no sense of how to judge the output of an AI or how the AI manipulates what they have written. The third dimension here is decisional agency, and this one is the one that most pertains to life outside of academia, but also it very much pertains to anything we produce that we would consider to be intellectual property. So decisional agency is the degree to which a human is making genuine, considered choices rather than just ratifying AI generated options. And it concerns choices throughout a task. So scope, framing, methodology, emphasis, and conclusion, not just the final product. You've heard a great deal now about how we have to shift our assessments from looking at the final product to looking at the process. So this addresses some of those stages of the process. A practitioner with full agency could explain the reasoning behind each significant choice in a way that does not reduce to the AI recommended it, which of course they'd never say, but that might be a sort of underlying motivation. So I've given a continuum here showing what I would consider to be differences between a genuine choice, an informed selection, or ratification. And I'll pause here just to say, um, I am very much a fan of AI. AI has helped me do a lot of thinking. But this is the scale on which I find myself shifting constantly and having to ask myself over and over consciously, where do I fall on this scale? Shall I stop and ask if there are questions?
There are no questions so far.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll finish so that we can talk about all of this. So this was going to be my demonstration of the live interactive tool. However, as I was just explaining to Julie, somebody with a very large class decided to use it today. So it crashed, which means that I need to buy more cloud storage. And so I thankfully had a screenshot of what this looks like. I developed this to be a free online tool that anyone can access. It does not gather data, and it honors privacy. All it does is give an immediate reflection back to the user of how much cognitive, communicative, and decisional agency they appear to have exercised on a project. So the this is basically a sort of workflow analysis. As soon as you finished a project or while you're in the middle of a project, you're just asked to rate whether you rarely or never, sometimes or consistently engage in activities that would compromise your agency. So the tool returns three subscores and then a diagnostic showing which dimensions are most generating the offloading and what possible responses you could have to that. What might you try? So it asks you to enter a project or workflow you're thinking about. So you can do that first. And then there's a series of questions. So for cognitive agency, the questions really concern what happens in the user's mind before, during, and after AI engagement. And work could be a draft, an analysis, a recommendation, or a plan. So this is just to give you a sample idea of what we're looking for. Before engaging AI on this task, I produced my own initial thinking in some form. Rough notes, a position statement, an outline, a hypothesis, even if what I produced was incomplete. The research on cognitive offload suggests that we are very likely, and also AI bias suggests that we're very likely to accept something that has been produced by AI, even if we know there are inaccuracies, because it is compellingly written, it is grammatically perfect, and it looks like it says something. I can explain the central argument or logic of this work without rereading the AI output. If someone asked me to defend it, I could do so from memory. So my classes have all started doing what in Europe they call vivas, which are brief, like 2-minute oral exams, where everybody at any point could be asked to explain exactly that, so that students are ready on their toes, always able to explain what they did. This has been used really successfully in computer science class oral exams for students to explain their coding choices as well. When AI generated an idea or framing I had not considered, I evaluated it against my own analysis before accepting it. So I used AI to test or extend thinking I'd already done. If the tool were removed from my workflow, I could have produced a credible version. I can distinguish between what I already knew and what AI contributed. At least once during the project, I disagreed with the content and chose not to use it, and I can say why. So if you can answer usually to most of these questions, then you're not engaging in too much cognitive offloading. If you are frequently engaging these activities and handing over your agency to AI, then there probably are some things you need to address in your workflow or your thinking. Second dimension, cognitive communicative agency, just questions that get at whose voice and judgment shape the output. Voice here refers not just to stylistic idiosyncrasies, but really the specific way that a writer or communicator positions herself in relation to her audience and her argument. So these obviously, I'm not going to take you through every question. This will be posted so you can look at the questions yourselves. I would love to hear if you have other thoughts on questions that should be asked. This has been used for 4 semesters. I've tested it out with lots of faculty who've tried it out on students and who've tried it out themselves. I also used this in a writer's workshop for faculty last month to get feedback. So this is a sort of um, uh, tweaked and tweaked and tweaked again version, and definitely not generated by AI. Just want to say. By the way, this final question here I really like. I would be able to read this work aloud in a public setting without the sense that I was performing somebody else's text. So I'm aware of that at this very moment that I am not performing someone else's text. Finally, the third dimension, decisional. The questions concern who sets the terms of the work and who resolves its uncertainties. And so, this is not formatting, it's not word level things. I think everyone is using AI for those things, and I don't have a problem with that. But it really is, did it change the direction or the character of the work? Did it change your argument? Did it change your opinion? I see students being argued out of deeply held opinions by AI, and that's concerning. So these questions range from I determined the goal, scope, and constraints of the project, and AI didn't set the terms, all the way to I noticed at least once that AI framing of a question was subtly wrong for my context and corrected it. So I want students to be reading for these things, for these details. Um, I am prepared to defend to a skeptical and well-informed colleague without referring to my AI notes. And, basically, did you judge? Did you exercise your judgment? I pushed back on at least one AI recommendation during the project because it didn't fit the situation, even though it was plausible. Because, of course, as we know, AI is a plausibility engine. LLMs will tell you exactly what you would expect to see. And therefore, it's very hard to notice because it's confirmation bias. It's very hard to notice when it's contradicting what you expect to see. So, to give you a sense of feedback, at the end of this quick questionnaire, uh, the user clicks view my scores and interpretation, and then this is the kind of response you might see. This was one that a student allowed me to just show. The student's cognitive agency was quite high, and there was some initial feedback on this. What is the appropriate next step? And then the tool links to a series of other exercises or questions that might be added to their arsenal as they move forward. Communicative agency was strong. The appropriate next step is maintaining a posture deliberately. So, actually paying attention, especially in those points where your workload is increased and you really don't have time to do everything. How do you hold the line? Where do you need to hold the line so that you know you did it yourself, so that you're not an imposter? Decisional agency was the low score for this particular student. And I just leapt around. Sorry about that. AI rather than you is doing a significant portion of the work. This is a structural condition. The tool is designed to produce it. So you're going to have to work on changing the workflow itself, not just becoming more vigilant with the existing workflow. And then it sends the user to recommendations for different types of workflow, particularly things like committing on paper, even if it's just a cocktail napkin in advance where you're going to go so that you can compare it directly to what AI has told you and you can see the discrepancy easily. So I will stop there simply by saying the framework is based on a number of other frameworks that come from other disciplines. My desire is to be able to produce a sliding scale instrument so that as people are working, they can adjust that scale back and forth, and see for themselves in real time what amount of offloading they're committing themselves to. So there's a self-assessment instrument that is online and free. It's accompanied by a classroom activity guide for different way exercises you can use to engage students in these questions, and then finally some design principles for educators and course designers to think through how would you design for more agency rather than for offloading. and I'll stop. And
That's a
hopefully
great,
we
that's
now
a
have
great
plenty
place.
of time to talk.
Yes, I do have one question from Kate, who is curious if you have considered the experience of non-native speakers of English or the effects of imposter syndrome in terms of cognitive offloading, in terms of deferring agency, believing the LLM must know better.
Yeah. So, first of all, I'm a non-native speaker of English. My first language is Spanish. My second language is French. And I get flagged all the time for AI by journals. So, I've had to learn how to change the way I write, the way I've always written, in order to not be thought of as an AI. So that's a different flavor of things. As you know, non-native speakers, the autistic and people who live with dialects that are more localized tend to be flagged more readily by AI detectors, which is why they don't work. This the question here is, how can you use this tool to show yourself how much you did? So I consider this a positive tool in that it's very easy to get to the end of the project now and not know if you did any of it yourself. It's a little too easy to walk away feeling like, yeah, actually, I probably couldn't have done that myself. And that is imposter syndrome. I mean, that literally, I think, LLMs are imposter factories. They give us every way in the world to look like we're doing something that we don't have confidence we can do. And to me, building some tools so that students can see what they accomplished, what they can claim, what they can be proud of is a fundamental aspect of teaching them how to use AI and how not to hand over their agency to it.
The only other question we have is actually a comment from Leanne, and I apologize if I pronounce this incorrectly. This makes me think of this piece about I cannot pronounce it. Heuristics, Heuristics. I'm sorry. Even when we know that AI has generated something incorrectly, our first impression has a much deeper impact.
Yeah, that's right.
So,
Well, and in fact, there's the research, the extensive research on AI bias, not just the AI being biased, but our bias when we look at AI, our willingness to believe that it's correct. Not most of the people I know are not using AI as an oracle, although a lot of the population is. It's sort of the magic 8 ball of life now. But we do incline toward believing the thing that is well stated, well presented, beautifully formatted, and therefore we have to fight harder to overcome our the gravitational pull of believing it as authoritative.
okay, well, and back to Kate. She's saying, thank you so much for that response. She's taking her imposter factories back to her faculty for discussion. So, and then our next question is Leah asking if you'll share the tool and guide with us.
Yes,
Okay,
absolutely.
perfect. And then if there's any other questions, feel free to unmute yourself and fire out your questions. Okay, I guess you get to continue with your great presentation.
Okay, well, I actually I will probably just stop there and let people have a chance to breathe because I think I may have moved through that quite quickly. I'll obviously I will post the slides so that you can work your way through it more gently, but also give it a try yourself. I'll provide the link. Hopefully the site will be back up in the next 24 hours. I have to go figure out what happened when too many people accessed it at once. But even even in the ideation phase of a project, it might help you reflect on your own work. Again, I welcome any comments you have. Please, in the Discord, I'll be watching for it. Any comments that you might have about things that are missing and that you would consider to be really strong indicators of cognitive, decisional, or communicative offloading. Okay.
The
Shall we
rest of
call
our
it?
comments, I think I'll let you wait. When you take off your screen, you can read through them. It's just a lot of great comments back to you on your presentation. So they're really
Thank you
not
so
questions.
much.
So
I'm really grateful to have needed to explain this to other people because I think that's really helping my thinking. So I appreciate all of you, and I hope you are also sitting with razor sharp knives and willing to give me actual feedback because that's what LLMs won't do
right.
unless you specifically tell them to be mean. So anyway.
We still have 15 more minutes, so this is opportunity for anybody who might have some questions. We have plenty of time.
I am interested in the question here of existential risk a little bit. I figured I might raise that. And that is, we've been hearing so long that AI is going to just kill us all, that the existential risk is that AI will be super smarter than we are. But really, I'm terrified that the risk is that we're going to give up. If you have reread Fahrenheit 451 recently, you will note that people didn't stop reading because the government prohibited it. People stopped reading because they just stopped reading. And so this is a larger systemic problem that we're facing. Oh, there's a hand up. Kate, do you want to say something?
Yeah, thank you. So
Yeah.
I'm a writing teacher and instructional designer, and I was really curious if you could talk more about the kind of writing that you're teaching, and what the objectives are of your course. And I'm assuming you're teaching in engineering,
Yeah.
and writing to engineers. And so I'd really be interested in what kinds of assignments you're doing.
Okay, yeah. So interestingly, in engineering in particular, the faculty have argued for years that what they want is technical writing, and actually, technical writing is something that AI does extremely well. So, what we're trying to focus on is the kind of writing where you are part of a narrative. So, one of our segments in the course is telling your own story. So they build a LinkedIn page, they build a resume, they have to write a bio. They have to try to engage with what they look like to the outside world and tell a coherent story. We get them to debate because a lot of students don't do debate anymore. We get them to engage in live conversation, which is terrifying if you've been, texting or on social media delay for most of your young adult life. So some of the things that we're working on are, the very pragmatic, how do you get a job? How do you tell your story things? Other things are more about how do you increase your curiosity and playfulness? How many different ways could you write this? How would your attitude toward what you're writing change if you do? How can you write with a group of people if you're trying to put together, say, a project design review document? So we look at individual writing, individual storytelling, collective storytelling, and how to reshape the same argument in different ways so that you get different results and perhaps different insights. Does that answer?
Yes, and thank you so much for that. I
Yeah,
really appreciate the context that you put that.
great. Okay. Well, how about everybody gets coffee now? I think we all could use some. And I'm looking forward to the next session, which ought to be really good. So thank you all for being here. And please get in touch with me if you'd like. I'm on LinkedIn. I posted that on the Discord. I'll post it again when I put up my slides. And I run a lab. If you're local, you're welcome to drop by and play with the toys in our lab. We have a disco ball, an espresso machine, and students who are willing to help. So that's it. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Awesome, Diane. Thank you for a great conversation today.
Of course.